All right, and I believe we're live. Hello and welcome to BookTrib's Facebook Live author interview series, brought to you by BookTrib and also our partner Penguin Publishing Group. My name is Chelsea Ciccone. I'm an editor at BookTrib, which is a discovery zone for readers as well as a marketing engine for authors and publishers. We're very excited today. We have Laura Hankin. Wave, Laura.
Hi.
And Emily Henry with us today. We're going to talk about their summer releases. Laura's novel, Happy and You Know It, as well as Emily's novel, Beach Read, which Emily has both of them behind her very conveniently. They both came out yesterday, May 19th, so happy pub day to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Throughout the interview, if any of you viewers have questions for either of the authors, feel free to leave them in the comments section on Facebook, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can, as well as some of questions that we solicited on social media earlier in the week. So to get things going, considering the state of the world, how are you both doing?
Oof, having a book come out is a really good distraction, I gotta say.
Yeah, that's really true. I know a lot of authors who have been really stressed out about having their books come out into this climate, and I totally get that. But I agree with Laura. I think it's been really nice to have something else to focus on. And even though I'm sad that I can't do live events, it's really cool that we can talk to readers who probably wouldn't be living in our same region or be able to come see us if we were on a physical tour. So that's cool. Definitely. I mean, I think it's probably how most people would answer. It's a day-to-day thing. There are days that I just lay on the couch feeling sad and bad. And then there are days where I wake up and clean my whole house and write 3,000 words. And I'm like, this is fine, everything's fine. So I'm trying to just, I don't know, give myself grace, I guess, to just feel whatever I'm feeling. And whenever I talk to my friends, make sure that they know too, I'm sad. It's okay if you're sad. And it's okay if you're happy too.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting thing, because I think hopefully everybody at this point is yeah, it's okay to be sad, but I think a lot of people feel guilty if they have a day where they're like, oh, this was a good day. It's sort of how dare I?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think I have felt some of that. And then I thought about, I don't know if either of you have read any of Bonhoeffer's writings, but he was writing in the time of the Holocaust and everything. And he just kind of, this is such a weird, let's kick off our
the Holocaust. Yeah.
He would write about how it was important to keep getting married and to keep having kids and to keep finding things to celebrate in life, even in that time, So I think that's the fun thing about about having a book come out right now. I think that a lot more people actually are reading than usually have time to read, and we're just finding little bits of hope and joy, and it's really cool to be able to contribute to that.
Yeah, definitely. And Laura, I noticed that you had a very awesome music video that you put out. I don't know, Emily, if you've seen it. It's called Indoor Book Tour, where she talks about how this whole process is going. That was so fun.
Thank you. I had a really good time making it. And again, it was a great distraction to just set up all these shots in my home and run around in my pajamas and pretend to be giving a book tour to no one. I do think my neighbors probably hate me though, because I was playing the song on repeat all day while I lip synced along to it.
But now they know the song. So really, It was a win-win.
Right. And it's the song of the summer, so they won't have to feel left out.
Yeah. They were there while they're there in the room where it happened, or next to the room where it happened. Yeah. So both of your books are summer reads. And, especially in this time where so many of us were cooped up and it's not really feeling like summer, having a book that's uplifting and entertaining and funny can be a really great distraction and escape. So how do you guys feel about having your books be at the beginning of these summer releases that are coming out and going to be in the hands of readers?
I mean, I feel great about it. I've been getting some messages from readers who say that, it feels like they're just getting to lie on a beach or gossip and drink wine with their best friend while they're reading the book. I think what we generally want from summer reads, and the whole idea of the summer read, is escapism and getting to forget the realities of life for a little while because you're on vacation. And, you know, now most of us are not going out on vacation, but hopefully we can bring a little bit of vacation to us by reading these books. And I certainly felt that way when I read Beach Read. I was like, oh my God, my life is so much better right now. I'm having a great time. So.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to like make lists in my head so I don't forget things I want to say. So first of all, I want to say about Happy and You Know It, a similar thing. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but I'm particularly like gossip starved. Like there's not like a whole lot happening in pop culture because everybody's just staying home. And when something does happen, it's just like somebody saying Imagine a cappella in their mansion, for example. So I think like I've just started to read Happy and You Know It, but I love that immediately there's like drama and like kind of scandal and tension. And yeah, like being in a bar and like being on a street where there are other people looking at you, like it adds like, I don't know, it's like the drama that I'm kind of like missing. But as far as Beach Read goes, yeah, I got one message from a bookseller who said that reading it, like there's a scene where the main character goes to Meijer, which is sort of like the Michigan, I don't know where all Meijer is, there's some in Ohio, but it's like the Michigan grocery store for anyone who doesn't know what it is. And she goes to Meijer and like gets a coffee from like the Starbucks in Meijer. And I had a bookseller message me and be like, it's making me so nostalgic for like grocery stores because a lot of us are like doing grocery delivery now and or just like really avoiding grocery stores as much as we can. And I thought that was kind of a funny thing, but there is something like nostalgic and summery about like going to the supermarket and getting an iced coffee. I don't know, to me, that's something that is like especially for the summer. I don't really do that any other time of year, but I don't know. So I think there's like weird little things too that kind of ping as like summery stuff that maybe we wouldn't be noticing as much if we were just living life as usual.
Mm.
Definitely. Well, let's sort of backtrack, but also go forward. Why don't I have each of you introduce your books before we get too deep into it? So we'll start with Laura. Do you want to talk about Happy and You Know It?
Sure. Yeah. Happy and You Know It is the story of Claire, a musician who gets kicked out of her band right before they shoot to superstardom. And so broke and desperate and having to hear their hit song everywhere, she takes this job singing to a play group of wealthy women and their babies on the Upper East Side. And she's expecting to hate it and find it very demeaning, and that these women are these like picture perfect stay-at-home moms who, you know, get together to drink wine and judge each other's parenting. But she ends up being surprised to find that she's kind of smitten with them. And they in turn are really fascinated by her and this freedom that she represents. And so they all become more and more intertwined. But as they do, their lives begin to unravel.
Very fun, very gossipy.
Yeah.
And Emily, tell us about Beach Read.
Yeah, so Beach Read is the story of January Andrews, similar to Claire in Happy and You Know It. She's sort of like in a down on her luck situation. Her father passed away a year before. She was very close with him. She idolized her parents' marriage, and it was sort of the inspiration for her becoming a romance writer. And shortly after he passes away, she finds out that he actually had a long-term affair. And that he owned a beach house on the shore of Lake Michigan, which he has left to her on his death. And ever since then, she has not been able to write romance because her whole view of love has been shaken to its core. So because of that, she doesn't have any money coming in, and she basically winds up in a situation where to support herself, she has to go stay in this beach house, get it cleaned up, ready to sell, and live rent-free for a few months while she forces herself to finish her book. And then when she moves there, she realizes that next door, her college rival, Gus Everett, who has become sort of a literary wonderkind, is now living. And they have sort of a contentious relationship / rivalry. But after they sort of bond a little bit, they decide to swap genres and try to write what each other normally writes because they're both so stuck creatively.
It's so good.
The writing in Happy and You Know It is so good and just like juicy without being like over the top or like, I don't know. I don't like, it's harder for me to get into really like dense writing, but there's this just like juicy, frothy quality. And I would say for everyone watching who likes Big Little Lies or any like Leanne Moriarty, like you're definitely gonna want to pick this up for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. About it.
You guys are so cute plugging each other's books.
So much easier to like plug someone else's book or sell someone else's book than your own, because you're like, I don't really remember what is in this book. I don't know. But when you're reading someone else's, you like know what's good about it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a bit about your lead characters. So for Happy and You Know It, we have Claire, and in Beach Read, we have January. Do you, when you're writing, do you start with your character, or do you start with more of a vague situation and then kind of move forward and develop that character as you go? We'll start with Emily.
Yeah, I actually weirdly usually start with setting for almost everything I've ever written, which is, I don't really know. I actually do know one other person who starts that way, and she's my sister-in-law, and we're like weirdly the same person. But yeah, I genuinely tend to start with setting, and that kind of informs the character. It's because it's like the main character is either going to be sort of the embodiment of that setting or in opposition to that setting. And that's not like an intentional thing, but I think that that's generally how it works. And yeah, I was just honestly really wanted to write a book or even read a book set on Lake Michigan in like a beachside town. So January was not the first part of it. She was probably the third. It was like beachside town in Michigan. I have horrible writer's block, so I don't know what to write. So I guess I'll write about writer's block. Would give someone writer's block if they were a romance writer and no longer believed in love. So she was like step 3.
Very interesting. And so Laura, tell us about Claire.
Yeah, it was sort of a special situation for this one because I did that job personally. I was a playgroup musician for many years. So I would like go to these apartments of wealthy women and sing to their babies. So in some ways, I guess Claire came first because she was sort of me, even though she grew to be very different from me in the writing. But then it was much more like, okay, so I know I want a musician, and then I want a playgroup. And then the fun was figuring out like, who are all of these different moms in the playgroup? Because I ended up having it be a multiple point of view novel where it alternates between Claire and a few of the moms. And so it was really exciting to get to dig into the differences between them and be like, oh, wait, this one's really fun. She's going to get her own chapter too.
That sounds really like a fun writing process.
Yeah, it was hard to get started. I made a lot of false starts, but once I did, then it was great.
And you know, what's really interesting, I think, about both of your novels is that in a lot of ways, your lead characters are very similar. In Happy and You Know It, Claire. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
In Happy and You Know It, Claire, you know, she's had success with the band, but now she's been kicked out. And now she's having to kind of use her skill set to find a different avenue to explore, which then leads her to this world of, you know, rich mommies and all their secrets. And then in Beach Read, we have January, who has written several books and has, you know, gained success in her field. And then, you know, this personal thing happens and she's kind of thrown for a loop and like, you know, how is she gonna write anymore? So maybe if you guys want to talk about that similar change where they're doing the same thing, but in like a different way, and how that, you know, goes for them. So we'll start with Laura this time.
Sure. Yeah. I was really interested in exploring this idea of like, what happens when you've built up this idea of yourself and who you are, and then all of a sudden, like, you're not that person anymore. And how do you reinvent yourself? And what I liked about that with Claire is that, you know, she's forced to reinvent herself as this playgroup musician, and she thinks she's going to hate it, but then it actually ends up teaching her some things about like maybe what she wants more truly. And, you know, when she was with this band, she was more of like the girl in the band, like the eye candy. And that it ends up being that this thing that happened that seemed so terrible now leads her to like a better, truer version of herself after, you know, some mistakes and false starts.
I'm curious, Laura, were you in a touring band before you did the play date stuff?
I was not. No, I never was. That part is not autobiographical. But I did move to New York to try to be a musical theater actor.
So yeah, you probably still had a lot of the same like crushing emotional moments. I say that because my husband is a musician. I feel like music is like such a nuts, like, I don't know. I mean, creative field, it can just be so crushing to you. And I feel like with Claire, it's like, of course this has happened. Of course she's like almost made it. And that's like what she was hinging her whole identity on. And that's like so wild.
Yeah, because you're like, okay, world, here is like my soul and my heart, and now judge it. I mean, it's sort of like writing a book too.
It is. It's very much the same thing. Yeah, cool.
So Emily, so tell us about January.
Yeah, I think that, before this I was writing and publishing young adult fiction. And what drew me to that, was a lot of different things, but one thing was just the concept of the coming of age. And I think so much of YA is about identity and like thresholds that you're crossing and how you're changing as you're going through those thresholds, and kind of what Laura was saying, having just your identity be this one thing, and then that's kind of taken away from you, and it's kind of how you built yourself up in your head, and now you have to figure out who you really are. And I think that the reason that both of these characters are sort of going through this big change is partly because they're like similar in age, and I feel like mid-20s to mid-30s, your whole like Saturn returns thing for anybody who's into astrology. You really get kind of broken down, and I feel like that's your second coming of age. And I'm sure there will be more, but I just haven't gotten to those ones yet. But yeah, I think that you have this coming of age where you have worked so hard at this point in life to be what and who you think you are. And I think that we have this idea as a culture that you just become yourself and that's who you are for the rest of your life, or like you find your one career and that's what you do for the rest of your life. And I don't think that that's really how it works for most humans. And so I think with January, it was really just like breaking down everything she thought about herself in the world in a way that I think is comparable to things that I've been experiencing within the last like 5 or so years.
Very nice. Yeah, I get what you're saying with the identity. And honestly, I think that's what makes books like that so appealing to people is, that what we've been told is like, you are this person, but seeing a character and you're like, yes, this is this thing I've experienced as well.
Yeah.
Able to explore that. So, so you're, both of your books, you have a kind of like different way of telling the story. January is the point of view character. We're seeing everything through her eyes. In Happy and You Know It, we see Claire, but also some of the other mothers that you encounter. So I wanted to ask you guys about that. How do you choose what kind of point of view or narrative style you're going to use? Is it something that happens like before you write, or is it something that becomes apparent after the story is a little bit more fleshed out? Emily, do you want to answer first?
Sure. Yeah. Also, like, feel free to signal me if I'm getting long-winded. I don't want to so I don't want to interrupt the first time. Yeah, I generally do just kind of start with how I'm envisioning a project. And then there have been times that I've had to stop and be like, okay, this doesn't feel right. I think I need a third person point of view for one reason or another. I do find that with romance, like anytime I'm writing a love story, I really have so far not been able to do that in third person. And that's why I've wound up in first person. And I think that that's because I need to believe it and I need to get swept up in it. I need to not be this removed force telling the story. I need to try to empathize with the characters fully and put myself in the situation. I need to go to that extreme. And I also think when you're reading romance, you're kind of agreeing to be swept up. Watching people fall in love is very awkward and uncomfortable. And there's like a lot of like, I don't know, just like cringy moments, just things that maybe if it were happening to you, it wouldn't be cringy, it might be sweet. But when you're watching it happen with other people, it's like, this is so embarrassing. It's so vulnerable. So I think I have to get myself out of that headspace and really put myself into the character in order to be able to write a convincing love story. So that's mainly why I do first person.
Okay. And Laura, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily know that all of these other moms were going to be getting their points of view into the book when I started writing. And so actually at first the book was way too satirical, and these moms were being presented in this light, like from Claire's point of view. And you just sort of hated them. And I was like, oh, nobody's going to want to read a whole book where these characters are like this. And so at first I thought, well, why don't I try to write some vignettes about their backstories, like from their point of view, just so I can get to know them better. And then that can come into the book as well. But I didn't necessarily know that I would be full on going into their point of view in the book. But as I was writing these vignettes, I was like, oh, their voices are coming to me in a really fun way. And I like their stories, and I like getting to go into their own struggles in a way that Claire, the musician, is not going to get to do, like just from her observation. And so it was really like a fun surprise that it was going to alternate between all these different voices. And yeah, I think it's important in this way because these moms are characters that on their surface you might love to hate them and feel like, oh, they're, these Real Housewives types. But I wanted you to empathize with them because I really empathized with them. And so I think letting you get inside their heads and letting you, see them at their most vulnerable was really important.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you can go.
Well, I love that so much about your book, and that I think is why I would comp it to something like Big Little Lies, because to me, it's so refreshing when you get to read about difficult women and you get to see why they're that way, or do you get to see how strong they really are? And I just feel like difficult women haven't been given a ton of space in fiction when they are, it's like they're sort of there to be a foil or to make the main character's life more complicated and whatever, but it's so much more interesting to see them as full people where it's like they're not good or bad. They might be difficult, they might throw wrenches into other characters like plans and lives. But yeah, I think that's something that's so great about your book, and about, I think, just the direction that women's fiction is going in general, just saying it's okay to tell these women's stories and to see them as human and as they can be the star, they can be the character you follow and root for, even though they can be obstinate or aggressive or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. More difficult women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's continue on this trend. Speaking of women, one of the things I found so interesting about both of your books is that you're sort of exploring this, we see women in one light, but that they're, we're a lot more complex than that. And like you said, these characters in Happy and You Know It, that you love to hate them, but then there's more stuff going on underneath the surface. And in Beach Read, one of the things that I really resonated with that January discusses is kind of being pigeonholed in this idea of what a romance writer is, even though she would describe it as women's fiction, and kind of the idea of her as an author is sort of created for her instead of letting her be her own author. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that theme in each of your books. Do you want to start, Laura?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I think particularly I was excited to explore that in mothers, right? Because they're supposed to be such a certain way, so grateful all of the time for their baby and so patient and all of these things. And I think particularly the women in this book, because they are very upper crust and very image conscious, never want to deviate from that. But under the surface, I think they're terrified that they're screwing up because the stakes are so high, right? It's the health of their child. And so they're they're willing to sort of desperately paddle like ducks underneath the surface while pretending that everything is all right, because they just have so many expectations placed on them because they have every privilege in the world. So how dare they be struggling?
And Emily, do you want to jump on?
Sure. So jump on. I think that it's kind of a continuation of like women's art, whatever, throughout history. You know, like women used to basically paint things that were like in the house, like in the home, and men would paint like myths and, you know, big wild man stuff, wars, whatever. And I think that there has been this idea that women's like interiority is like specific to women and is less important than the things that men do or make. And I, you know, obviously that's changed a ton, but I just think about like in the art world, or like in fiction specifically, the concept that there is women's fiction. And women's fiction, you know, I'm kind of two minds about that genre in general, because on the one hand, I think it's like sort of silly to just be like, this is women's fiction because it's about women and written by women and it doesn't fit into any other genre. But on the other hand, I go straight to the women's fiction category at a bookstore because I know like these are books for me. These are books that were written about the kinds of things that I think about and I talk about. And I think, you know, like women are just socialized in a way to spend a lot of time thinking about their feelings and their relationships and that sort of thing. And because that's how we've been socialized and it's kind of been like gendered, I think that the writing about those things has been taken so much less seriously for a long time. And it's treated sort of as like domestic, like it's like there's this domesticity about like women's fiction. So I think, I don't know, it's been pretty amazing actually publishing this book that was pitched as like a rom-com that I think of very much as a romance and a love story, and seeing a lot of people who don't normally read romance picking it up and just kind of giving it a chance, basically because of the situation the world is in right now and they need something a little bit lighter, and realizing like that they're engaged by it because love is like a fairly universal thing. Like, why wouldn't you want to read about love? I mean, why is that silly? Why is it innately silly or unserious to think about love or to think about relationships? I think those things are very integral to the human experience. So yeah, I really have two minds about like so many things, but especially I think the title of women's fiction. It's like really awesome that there's something being put out there that's like, we're making this with you in mind, but I wish that men were also reading it.
Well, and that's one of the things that I love so much about the relationship between January and Gus, right? Is like his attitude towards her work, which I don't want to give any spoilers, but I think like the way that her understanding of that evolves over the book and like his professional respect for her makes him like real dreamy. It is.
I actually did an Instagram live last night as well. And we were like talking about that. And I realized like the biggest, somebody asked me like my favorite romance trope. And I was like, well, I love hate to love, but I do not like it when there's like disrespect involved. And that was a really tricky line to ride, to be like, I want this to feel like a hate to love romance, but he cannot be like outright disrespecting her. She can feel disrespected, but there has to be some baseline level of respect, or like, this is off.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I really appreciated that about your book, Emily. You know, kind of breaking those stereotypes. And actually, so someone just asked for both of you, what are some women's fiction that you've read that kind of do the same thing? Do you guys have any that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean,
throwing you a curveball. so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try and limit myself. Normal People is a good example. It's not classified as women's fiction because Sally Rooney is such a phenomenal writer, so they just call it literary fiction. But it's a straight up, I almost just swore, and I'm sorry. It's a straight up love story. It's a complicated, dark, complex love story, but it's a love story. And anything by Taylor Jenkins Reid or Leanne Moriarty, I would say, like, yeah. Those are but where it feels both literary and commercial at the same time. It's written by a woman, kind of about and for women, but men could read anything. I mean,
yeah.
Read. I'll keep brainstorming more.
Yeah, I agree. All those ones that you just mentioned, Leanne Moriarty, of course. I feel like Little Fires Everywhere was able to cross over, but like I definitely could have seen it getting pigeonholed into like that world.
For sure.
I'm glad that it didn't. Yeah.
For sure. That's such a good thing. I'm just like, on the romance end of things, I think that Helen Huang is a really great example of that. She's writing romance, but I don't know, there's just a lot of depth there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody's already heard of Helen Huang, but if you haven't, look her up. She wrote The Kiss Quotient and The Bride Test. And yeah.
Those are really, really great recommendations.
It's the sort of thing where I know that there are like so many others that I want to recommend, and I just can't think of them right now.
Yeah, you're put on the spot. Well, one of the questions we got earlier in the week, and Laura, you sort of tapped into this a little bit earlier, but they were curious on if there were like personal inspiration or personal things that stimulated each of your books. So Laura, you talked a little bit about, kind of being a musician and doing that, what you did in your book, but is there anything else, or Emily, something?
Yeah, I mean, there was a specific moment that really launched this book while I was doing my musician job, which was that one day I got hired to do a play group that was meant to help lonely new moms find new mom friends. Yeah, so I showed up at the location, and this one new mom and her baby showed up, and we were waiting for all of her new mom friends to arrive, and just nobody came. Yeah, and so it was like sad and awkward, but then eventually we started talking, just the two of us, and I realized how cool she was. She like had named her baby Cordelia because she loved King Lear.
I thought you were going to say Buffy, to be honest.
That's where I was going, yeah.
Yeah, I should.
Slightly more famous Cordelia.
Yeah, but we never saw each other again after that. But I would like think of her and be like, oh, maybe in a different world we would have been friends. And it made me wonder what would have happened if a musician and the women who'd employed her were like forced together and did become perhaps too involved with one another.
I love that. I mean, I don't love that for her. I hope she's found more friends since then, but I love that story.
I bet she has. She was cool.
Yeah, I'm sure she's very popular.
Yeah.
And Emily, was there anything for you that sparked?
I mean, there was so much. I with every book I do, I feel like it's just this confluence of every single thing that I'm thinking about at that time. But a few years before I even wrote the book, this actually made it into the book. A few years before I wrote the book, I had just sold my first young adult novel, and I was out at like a birthday dinner, so there were a lot of like friends of friends there, and it had just happened. So I was like telling people like, yeah, I finally sold a book, and they asked about it, and I was like, okay, well, it's like a young adult novel, and it's romance, and there's like a sci-fi element and whatever. And this friend of a friend was like, yeah, I mean, whatever pays the bills, right? And I know that he didn't think are you shocked? I know that he didn't, that he was like denigrating me. I think what he genuinely thought is that like, well, we all know we're above that. And so if you're doing that, it's not because it's the only thing you could do, or surely it's not because you want to do it. It's because there's money there, which is also just like, people who don't write do not understand like the realistic amount of money that is involved in publishing. It is not like a glamorous, like we're not J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
So
that
was a moment that made it into the book. She's kind of like January's complaining about the way that women's fiction is treated, because I think it's sort of similar to young adult, where it's if somebody respects you but doesn't respect that genre, then they're going to make a lot of assumptions about why you're doing it, and they're not going to be true. And it feels bad. I mean, it feels bad to be put in that position where you think you're giving me a compliment almost, but I love what I do and I believe in it and I do take it seriously and I think that I'm good at it.
Yeah. That's, I remember that moment in the book.
It's real.
Well, we're sort of coming up on time here, so I'm gonna ask you guys one more question from our viewers, and then we'll wrap up question. But somebody wants to know, what is your favorite place to write, or is there a specific view where you feel most creative?
Yeah, it's not an option for me anymore because she moved.
Well,
Well, yeah, and it wouldn't be now anyway, but especially when I was writing Happy and You Know It, my grandmother still lived in the house where my mom grew up in Connecticut outside of New Haven. And whenever I could get away, I would go up there and write there. And it would be incredible because it's like this old Victorian house in this beautiful town where you can like walk to the ocean. And I would never connect to the Wi-Fi, so I didn't have that distraction. And I would just take like long walks every day, and then like have a Manhattan with my grandmother, and then she would go to bed at 8 o'clock at night. And then I would write and like maybe make a little fire, and it was the most idyllic thing in the world. So that was my favorite place to write.
That's my favorite place to write too, is your grandmother's house.
Yeah.
I honestly am mostly just a couch writer. It's like I lie in this really uncomfortable position with like, I'm flat, but then my head's just up and my laptop's right here, and then like my wrists start hurting and I have to ice them. I have a desk. I don't like writing at a desk. I don't like writing at a table. I like to be yeah, in the famous position. I do love and prefer to write where there is a window. There are a lot of trees in my backyard, and so that's like, you know, that's my favorite. I love when it's raining. Like there's nothing cozier than writing while it's like pouring rain, like Jurassic Park style rain. But I mean, I'll take what I can get, basically. It's like to the point now where I don't have many rituals to my writing process. I'm just like, well, I've got to write.
All right, so to kind of bring this all to a close, I have a question for each of you. It's sort of the same question, but for your respective books. So to start, Laura, Happy and You Know It answers the question blank.
Oh, Happy and You Know It answers the question, what's behind the perfect facade that you see on social media?
I wish you had dropped like a smoke bomb at that moment.
Disappeared. Yeah.
And Emily, Beach Read answers the question.
Is love worth it, knowing the pain that it can cause you?
Oh. It's so beautiful.
Every book I write is basically that question, but that one especially.
Wow. Well, what a great way to end this interview, right on a high note.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. I had so much fun. I hope you guys had a lot of fun too.
For sure.
Be sure to check out Happy and You Know It and Beach Read out now.
As of yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you, everyone.